You see, the thing is, guys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, there was a lot of scared men and women in the army. Teenagers that are probably in the army, obviously, or people that are in the cadets and starting to go in the army. Probably 16 and 17-year-olds. But Prime Minister Boris Johnson is making a statement on the British involvement in Afghanistan. So a lot of British soldiers from the UK have died in Afghanistan, so has Americans, and probably some Talibans and, actually some Talibans have probably died, yeah, but they're making things worse for a lot of people. So Boris Johnson's doing a speech on YouTube. Well, I'm trying to say is, lots of their friends and families would be happy for their family members to come home and their friends to come back home to see them as well. And it's very saddening and heartbreaking to see people go through that. Sometimes you see your loved ones again, other times you won't. So this is what Boris Johnson is speaking about on the TV. As you can see here, it talks about US war in Afghanistan has costed estimate amounts of 2.26. As you can see there, as February 8.3200 American troops have survived in Afghanistan. As you can see here, Afghanistan, the end game. There's Boris Johnson speaking there, Prime Minister of the UK. So there's a lot of mixed emotions about this, and the people that are there, a lot of scared people. Some people probably don't want to join war, but the only thing is, it's a job they have to do to protect the people and the civilians. I mean, on both sides are they doing that? The Taliban is causing trouble. More than 2.4 US soldiers have killed in action seen in October 2021. So there's probably some women soldiers that are in the army as well. You can see Boris Johnson's doing his speech there, Prime Minister. So the thing is, I just thought it'd be interesting to do a video like this. I mean, some of these soldiers are probably glad they're coming home. 400 UK soldiers, military personnel, have been killed in action seen October 2020, October since 2001. You know, a lot of scared men and women that actually joined the army but didn't want to. It's a job, like I say. They would rather bring back their soldiers home and not die, obviously, because it hurts them. Once you've lost a loved one and a soldier or a best friend, it's going to stick you forever when you lose a loved one or a soldier best friend, losing them in battle, in war. 71,000 civilians estimated to have died due to the war. Shaw Brown, yeah. So Afghanistan end game. Talks about the vaccination for people able to return to quarantine-free England. That's on that side of the screen. Talk about the Taliban years as well. Transport security giant snaps says under. Between 66,000 69,000 Afghanistan soldiers are estimated to have been killed since or seen 2001. That's what Boris Johnson's speaking about as well. You can probably hear in the background talking on my phones over there. But I just thought it'd be quicker and easier to talk like this. Under the NATO-Taliban deal with the USA, NATO allies must withdraw all troops by September. So it looks like it's not getting too safe for the soldiers to be there. They need to be withdrawn out. Talking about countries will not have isolation up to return from the 19th of July. Transport is talking about again, but I mean, they don't just wake up one morning and think they're going to be a soldier and go into war. Afghanistan game. US President Joe Biden has plugged to withdraw all troops from Afghanistan by the 11th of September 2021. We're talking about 2018 he's talking about. All US lands launches invasion of Afghanistan. Will the country be better, Afghanistan? Will it get worse, or will the Taliban get a strong hold again and the US have to go back in and the British? Or will they just let them, or lead them to do their own thing? Who knows? It's talking about the armed forces again. You know, there was a war in Iraq, war of Afghanistan. There's probably still wars going on in other countries in the world, which people don't like, but it happens. I mean, a lot of scared individuals. It's going back to that 71,000 civilians again. I'm going to try and find a different picture that I can show you, if it's going to actually show. There we go. Bin Laden was killed in US raid Pakistan in 2011. I don't know if Bin Laden's son is dead as well, I don't know, but... Or Saddam Hussein, I mean, they don't mention him either. I mean, going back some time as well. Things do change over time, he's right there on that. So we're going to try to find another picture. US Taliban peace deal with signing. I mean, it would be nice if their country did actually get back to normal in Afghanistan. Will it get back to normal, or is this just a fluke? I mean, it could do. We'll just have to wait and see, guys and girls, ladies and gentlemen. Seen in 2003, operation in Afghanistan has been conflict under the name of Operation HERRIK. He's talking about the British soldiers. He says it must be realistic. 3.7 children are estimated to remain out of school in Afghanistan. Be good if the children get their education back, some people would agree with, you know, and get away from this war and grow up in a place they could be safe and warm and be happy with their friends and grow up to be children again, and eventually we all know the adults again. 0.6 Afghanistan population has no dose of COVID vaccine. Sure, the world in data. Side our friends is talking about as well. So we're going to be trying to find other things that the thing talks about. There's a woman on this side talking about stuff. I don't know what she's saying, but I'll have to unplug the microphone. This one. Let's have a look.
And may I also associate myself
Talk about Northern Ireland or something.
Prime Minister regarding the British service personnel and the collective efforts of our partners in NATO.
Talking about partners in NATO.
This is a profound moment for more than 150,000 UK personnel who have served in Afghanistan during the last 20 years, including my honourable friends and members for Barnsley Central and Norwich South, and many more honourable members across this House. My own brother too served in the British Armed Forces during that period, so I know how it feels to say goodbye to a loved one before a tour of duty. Thankfully, Mr. Speaker, I do not know how it feels not to see your loved one come home again, and the pain that those families have gone through is unimaginable. Hundreds of British men and women lost their lives in the service of our country. Many more were wounded or injured and still suffer the physical and emotional scars. They have shown extraordinary bravery, skill and courage. So today, Mr. Speaker, to everyone who served in Afghanistan and to all that loved them and supported them, we say a huge thank you. There have been moments of huge difficulty in the last 2 decades, and the situation on the ground in Afghanistan today is more concerning than at any other point in many years. That must not take away from the many positives of our engagement has brought to Afghanistan and the real difference our services and development sector have made in a country that has suffered so much. We have supported improvements in security, in governance, in economic development, and, as the Prime Minister said, in advancing the rights of women and education for girls. Yet these gains have not been secured. The Taliban are making gains on the ground, and serious questions remain about the future stability of Afghanistan.
55 UK soldiers, military personnel have been killed in action seen October 2001.
And nobody wants to see British troops permanently stationed in Afghanistan, but we simply cannot wash our hands or walk away. It's hard to see a future without bloodier conflict and wider Taliban control. Already, they are on the brink of gaining control of provincial capitals, and Afghan security forces are at risk of being overwhelmed. This, Mr. Speaker, spells jeopardy for the Afghan people, particularly for Afghan women and girls, and all the things that the Prime Minister talked about earlier, who just in a just world would have had the same rights as women everywhere deserve. And in the words of the Prime Minister himself, this is a situation fraught with risk, and I understand that. So can he tell us if he argued for or against the withdrawal of the US government and in NATO, and what other steps he proposed? Our British troops made enormous sacrifices, and we believe as a nation we have a responsibility to our veterans. Can the Prime Minister really tell them that our work as a nation in Afghanistan is done and their efforts will not be in vain? On their behalf, Mr. Speaker, I ask the Prime Minister, what plans are now in place to ensure that Afghanistan does not become a failed state and a breeding ground for those that wish to oppress their own citizens and threaten ours, and what additional threat does our country now face? What diplomatic plans will be in place in the region to support the peace process? And is the government, UK government, engaging with the government of Pakistan about its role? And will the UK embassy in Kabul remain? And how will we keep our UK staff there safe? Afghanistan remains one of the most poorest countries in the world. Yet our aid funding to that country is being cut by more than £100 million, he referred to today. The UK funded a project of 6,000 women that has already been
Between
cancelled.
69,000, 66,000 Afghanistan soldiers estimated have been killed since 2001.
So can the Prime Minister tell the House what impact his cuts to the aid budget will have on programmes there, and will he not rethink those cuts again? Mr. Speaker, I reiterate that we all want to see an end to UK military operations in Afghanistan. But if we leave without putting a plan in place to ensure that Afghanistan does not go back to the conflict and violence of the past, then we would have failed those that have given so much over the last 20 years. Building and maintaining the peace and prosperity of Afghanistan, protecting women and girls, and in turn protecting our own nation should always be our priority. To honour the legacy of those that have served and the lives that were lost, let's make sure, Prime Minister, we get this right.
Prime Minister. I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Lady for what she said, and particularly the spirit in which she said. Let me try and address some of her points. It is clear that what is happening now is a follow-up to what was very largely the withdrawal, the end of military operations in 2014. The presence since then has been much smaller, but a great deal of good work has continued to be done by British aid workers, by British armed forces, and by British diplomats. And she's right to draw attention to the work of educating girls and young women. I think the whole country can be proud of what has been achieved, and I can reassure her by saying that actually this country will not only continue to fund education in Afghanistan, continue to support Afghanistan to the tune of £100 million, as I said, but we will also increase our funding for the Global Partnership for Education, and we'll be making further announcements about that later this month, when the Global Partnership for Education takes place here in London. And she asks the most important question, which I think veterans of the Afghan conflict will want to know, which is whether we think that the threat from Afghanistan has now been reduced. And the answer is yes, we do think the threat from Al-Qaeda is very substantially lower than it was in 2001. There remain threats, of course, from the Islamic State of Khorasan, from the Haqqani network. Of course, there remain terrorist threats from Afghanistan. But the answer is to have a peaceful and a negotiated solution, and that is what our diplomats will continue to work for. And I would just say to the Taliban, they've made the commitment that I read out to the House in their negotiations with General Khalilzad. They must abide by those commitments, and they should. I'm sure that they will be aware that there is no military path. There is no military path to victory for the Taliban. There must be a peaceful and a negotiated settlement for the political crisis in Afghanistan. And the UK will continue to work to ensure that that takes place. And I believe that that can happen. I don't believe that the Taliban are guaranteed the kind of victory that you sometimes read about, Mr. Speaker. And the UK will continue to exert all its diplomatic and political efforts to ensure that there is a better future for the people of Afghanistan, for the women of Afghanistan, for young people growing up in Afghanistan, and that the legacy of those 150,000 British serving men and women who went through Afghanistan, and above all the 457 who laid down their lives, that their legacy is properly honoured, Mr. Speaker.
Comes to the church, Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And first of all, say thank you to the Prime Minister for coming and giving this statement himself. This is an enormously personal issue for me. I didn't meet the Honourable Member for Barnsley Central here or in any of the clubs or think tanks around Westminster. I met him about 20 miles to the west of Garmsir in the desert as we were fighting side by side against the enemies he's just listed. And the achievements that he has listed were won with the blood of my friends. And I can point him to the graves where they now lay, because that legacy is now one that is in real doubt, and we know it. And we know that it's not just his decision. We know that the US decision to withdraw forces was fundamental here. But can he explain to me, how does Britain's foreign policy work in a country like Afghanistan? If persistence isn't persistent, if endurance doesn't endure, then how can people trust us as an ally? How can people look at us as a friend? This reminds me not of Vietnam, but of Germany in 1950, at a time when we could have walked away. We could have said, it's too expensive, it's too difficult to rebuild. Let's let Stalin have it.
Since 2003, Operation Afghanistan has been
so we liberated the whole
under
peacefully. Now, I understand that it's hard to do that, and I understand it demands a lot. The integrated review set out a really impressive strategy, and it wasn't just summarized with the 3 words, God bless America.
Yeah, very good. I thank my honourable friend, and I'm sure the whole House will want to thank him for his service in Afghanistan and everything, the good that he did with his fellow serving men and women in Afghanistan. But as I think he conceded in his question, what the UK has been able to do in Afghanistan has not been possible through our efforts alone, Mr. Speaker. And we have to work with others. And of course, the United States plays a massive role in these considerations. But I wish to reassure him and to reassure the House that we are not walking away. And I made that point absolutely clear to President Ghani on the 17th of June. We are, as I say, the Right Honourable Lady, I should have answered that point. We are keeping our embassy in Kabul, and we will continue to work with our friends and allies, and particularly with the government of Pakistan, to try to bring a settlement, to try to ensure that the Taliban understand that there can be no military path to victory, and there must be a negotiated solution. And that is what the British government will continue to do, and that has been very largely what we have been doing, Mr. Speaker, since 2014.
We now come to SNP leader Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And actually, it's a pleasure to follow the member for Tunbridge and Mullingan. We should listen very carefully to what he had to say, for he and others in this House that served in Afghanistan, and indeed all through these islands that went to that country, those that have sadly lost their lives, but those, of course, who were injured in the conflict, many of those that are maimed for the rest of their life. Let me thank the Prime Minister for coming to the House and for advanced sight of his statement. This is an important statement, and of course it's largely about national security. And let me state that I think there is an obligation on all of us on this side of the House to work constructively, to be a critical support to what we're seeking to achieve here. And in that spirit, I commend the Prime Minister and his office for agreeing to Privy Council meetings for the Leader of the Opposition and ourselves, because it's important that we are as informed as we should be in order that we can play the role in scrutinising the government, but supporting as where appropriate. Mr. Speaker, while there would have been no question about the UK realistically maintaining a presence unilaterally in Afghanistan, there is no point pretending that the vacuum created by the accelerated withdrawal of and allied forces has done nothing but create instability. Mr. Speaker, we know the departure of the remaining Western forces from Afghanistan has emboldened Taliban insurgents. In recent days, the Taliban have seized several districts, and they have made it clear that they expect any Western forces left behind, even those guarding Kabul airport or embassies, to be a violation of the Doha deal. Mr. Speaker, it is the stability of the country and the humanitarian interests of Afghanis which should be foremost in the minds of the leaders who have had operations in that country. A situation where violent extremism and fundamentalism returns to the heart of political life in Afghanistan would be dire for Afghanis as well as our allies in the region and beyond. Mr. Speaker, in the last hours we've seen a fight back, both from Afghani government troops as well as civilians, intensify. And a stark reminder of what is at stake, thousands of women have protested in the streets for the freedoms that they know that the Taliban will deny them. All they want is what we want, a more open Afghanistan that is a better place for women for its future instead of going back to the senseless cruelty of the past. For these reasons, it is utterly inexplicable that we have cut aid spending in this country. It hinders any progress in rooting out extremism, abuses against women, and of course, protecting human rights. Can I ask the Prime Minister as to what general assessment has been made as to any potential security implications of the developments in Afghanistan? What are the implications of any threats from Al-Qaeda and Islamic State? What measures will be taken by the UK government to protect the UK's diplomatic presence in Kabul? Finally, Mr. Speaker, I would like to take the opportunity to pay respects on behalf of my party to the families of the 457 British troops whose lives were lost in Afghanistan. I'm sure many of them will be following the proceedings in this House and the actions taken by the government. They'll be asking questions to make sure that there is a lasting legacy to the sacrifices that were made by so many.
Again, I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for the spirit and the content of his remarks, and on the substance of his questions. To me, our assessment is that the threat from Afghanistan to this country is very substantially diminished as a result of the actions by the UK and our friends over the last 20 years. Though clearly a threat remains, and the extent of that threat will now depend on exactly what happens. And to come to his points about the Taliban, their intentions, and the progress that they are making, I think it is true that the Taliban are making rapid progress in rural areas. But that does not mean, Mr. Speaker, that they are guaranteed a victory in the whole of Afghanistan or across the urban areas of Afghanistan. Points out in his question, there is lively resistance to what they have to offer and their view of the way things should be. And that's why this government, through all our agencies, diplomatic, political, development and otherwise, we will continue to work for a negotiated settlement, particularly with regional actors such as Pakistan. And I do believe that is the best way forward for Afghanistan. There must be a settlement, and it will have to, I think we must be realistic about this, Mr. Speaker, it will have to include the Taliban.
We have audio only as we go to Tobias. Tobias.
Mr. Speaker, decisions don't come any bigger for a Prime Minister than to send our armed forces to war. But when an overseas operation lasts 2 decades, costs hundreds of British lives, billions of pounds to the taxpayer, and ends in retreat, it would be a dereliction of duty not to ask what went so wrong. We now abandon the country to the fate of the very insurgent organisation we went in to defeat in the first place. I say to the Prime Minister, if we don't learn the lessons of failing to appreciate Afghan history, the folly of imposing Western solutions, the delays in training Afghan security forces, and denying the Taliban a place at the table back in December 2001, we are likely to repeat similar mistakes in the future. I ask the Prime Minister, please conduct a formal inquiry.
I must caution my honourable friend that I don't think that is the right way forward at this stage. And he asks about he calls this a retreat, Mr. Speaker. This was never intended at any stage to be an open-ended commitment or engagement by UK armed services in Afghanistan. There was no intention for us to remain there forever. And as the House knows, Operation Herrick concluded in 2014, and at that stage, the Army conducted a thorough internal review of the lessons that needed to be learned, and those were incorporated into the integrated review of our armed and security defence strategy, which was published earlier this year. And, Mr. Speaker, given the length of such inquiries, I think the Chilcot inquiry went on for 7 years and cost many millions of pounds. I do not think that this is necessary at this stage. I think that the government should rather focus its efforts on ensuring that we do everything we can to secure the prosperity and the peace, I should say, and stability of the people of Afghanistan. And that's what we'll do.
Let's go to Ed David. Ed.
Mr. Speaker, can I join the Prime Minister in paying tribute to the role our armed forces have played in Afghanistan, and especially remember the 450 men and women who laid down their lives and the many more who sustained lifelong injuries. We are grateful to them and remember them and their families. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister rightly says our country retains a responsibility to the people of Afghanistan. So with Afghan soldiers trained by allied forces surrendering all too frequently, and with some analysts predicting that the Taliban are probably only months away from taking Kabul, and with a new era of injustice, inequality and brutality facing the women and girls of Afghanistan, and with the potential for a new vector of international terrorism forming across Afghanistan, can the Prime Minister explain with far more substance how the British government plans to work with our international partners to fulfil the responsibility he accepts we still have to the Afghan people?
Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we are going to continue, first of all, on his first point about supporting the Afghan national security and defence forces. We will continue to do that, as I have said, and as I pledged to President Ghani, with at least another £58 million. And what we are doing is working with the regional actors, particularly Pakistan, and he knows that the Pakistan.
I'm going to pause it here in a minute and see how long it's on for. I think it's halfway through the video. I don't know. It could be a bit longer. But like I say, this will probably be part 2 because I've done like 30 minutes on the video. So I paused it for a minute, obviously. And I just want to say rest in peace to the men and women. The 450 that have died from the UK and the USA. Rest in peace. Some of them survived, the men and women from the USA and UK, and made it home. Some of them didn't. And it's very heartbreaking, and that's what I needed to say in the video. And if they're in a better place, I hope they're all well, even though if there's a place after life, some people don't believe that, some people do. But it's a saddening thing to go home and tell your family members that you've lost your loved one. It really is. But anyway, I better play the rest of the video.
In Afghanistan, we are working with the Pakistan government to ensure that there is a progress towards a negotiated solution. And in Kabul, there are many actors, as I'm sure the Right Honourable gentleman knows, that it is a very fractured scene politically in Kabul.
So this is part 2 of the video.
Knows all those actors well. It is essential that they work together for a negotiated settlement and work together for the long-term future of Afghanistan, and that's what we will do.
Speaker, I thank the Prime Minister for coming to the House to make this statement. Can I say to him that we clearly, I agree with him, owe a debt of honour to our members of our armed forces, many who have lost their lives, but also those who have been badly maimed and who have done their country proud in what they've delivered. As he said, education for women, clinics, healthcare, and freedoms that were not there before under the Taliban. The Prime Minister said in his statement, though, that he says, I hope no one will leap to the false conclusion that withdrawal of our forces somehow means the end of Britain's commitment to Afghanistan. So I have a very simple question for him. How far does that commitment extend? If the Taliban take over and they take away the women's rights to education, do we intervene? If they take away the rights and freedoms that we gave them, do we intervene? If they end up killing and maiming more people in Afghanistan and allowing terrorist organizations in, do we intervene? My question is, as one veteran said to me literally 48 hours ago, this begins to look a little bit like the last days of Vietnam, an unprecedented and hurried exit with no commitment. Are we committed?
Yes, as I said in my answers to the Right Honourable Lady and to other members who asked effectively the same point, the circumstances in 2001 when this country went into Afghanistan were quite exceptional. NATO's Article 5 of mutual appeal for defence was invoked by our American friends, and that's why we went in. And it was a quite exceptional moment. And since then, in the last 20 years, we have achieved a very great deal. Increase in life expectancy in Afghanistan from 56 to 64 years. The education of women has been mentioned, and we will continue through development assistance and by other means to do whatever we can for the long-term future of Afghanistan. But as he knows, the fundamental military decision to cease Operation Herrick was the turning point. And what we're going to do now is use our best endeavours, our best efforts, all our political engagement to produce a negotiated settlement and to produce a stable future for Afghanistan.
We can now go to Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This has to be a day of reflection.
God.
We have spent billions of pounds in the war in Afghanistan. 450 British troops have lost their lives. Thousands of Americans and other troops have lost their lives. And many, many thousands of Afghan people have lost their lives. And many more have been forced to be refugees in exile all around the region, as well as in Western Europe. Surely we need to think about this very, very carefully.
And it's disappointing that the Prime Minister appeared to reject calls for an inquiry at the Liaison Committee yesterday and appeared to reject the request.
Never gives up, Jeremy Corbyn, does he?
For Bournemouth East today. Can I ask him to think again about that? Surely we need an inquiry into how such a decision came around.
That's why you lost the vote, Jeremy Corbyn. You didn't win. Labour, Conservative won.
From Afghanistan, and of course the chaos that is being left behind. He will have noted that there are some talks going on which have been cautiously welcomed by the United States in Tehran between the Afghan government and the Taliban. He will also have noted that there are large numbers of Afghan refugees now in Tajikistan as well as in Pakistan. What efforts will he be making to try to ensure that there is not a descent into civil war in Afghanistan, but some kind of diplomatic initiative that would at least bring about security for the people of Afghanistan, and that includes obviously the entire population. And I'm thinking here particularly those children that have suffered so much and those women that have been so grievously discriminated against within that country. And whilst Britain is withdrawing, surely we need to recognise that when we make hasty foreign policy decisions to go to war, the consequences go on for a very long time. In this case, it is now the 20th anniversary of that decision.
Thank the right honourable gentleman, and I'm of course aware of what's happening in Iran and the contacts that are taking place, and the role of the UK government is to promote dialogue, and I've said what I've said about the Taliban and the reality of the position that Afghanistan finds itself in. I don't think that the Taliban are capable of victory by military means. I've made that point several times, and the UK will work principally through.
Well, I'm going to end this video now, and we're going to be doing a bit more of part 3, hopefully. So thank you for joining this video, and I'll see you on the next one. Guys, girls, ladies and gentlemen, peace.